Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here either on the live discussion or if you're listening to the recording of this webinar. We actually gave it a thought if we should go ahead with this webinar, given the current situation we are in. As you remember, or just as a reminder, we began these webinars in response to the seismic events we had in January, and most of the themes have been, coming together in regards to that issue. And today's was the safety gap created by an unaffordable design and construction industry. And we kind of took a second to think about if this was relevant in in this moment. And we believe it is, because part of this emergency and this crisis has really just exacerbated much of the problems we are currently facing. We have a lot of refugee camps still in the southern western part of Puerto Rico, which we need to take different protocols and safety in that area. So this theme is very, very relevant today. So we continue to have the webinar. So again, thank you for being here either live or during the recording of this webinar. We have two great ladies that are joining us today. Cristina Algaze, she's the registered architect, principal of MAS, and our very own Rebeca Vicens, which she's a director of Filantropía, Puerto Rico. But today she is joining us as a registered architect that she is, and a lot of the community work that she has done with us during all her lifetime. So I'm happy to have both of them. Thank you so much for being here. To everybody that's in the webinar, you can ask your questions at the bottom of the Zoom window. You will have a Q&A. You also have a chat, but you can go ahead at any time during the presentation, write your questions there. We will take a minute at the end, not a minute, we'll take 15 minutes at the end to answer questions and interact more directly with you. But if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, go ahead and send that in the Q&A box and we will address it at the end. So I think we're ready to start. Not sure, I can't remember who had the control of the presentation. I think it's Cristina.
Yes.
But, awesome. So we're all set. I wanted to go ahead and ask. I think we spoke about having this webinar with a little different flavor. All the webinars we've been having till this moment are very presentation-wise, and then we have questions. So we're gonna try something a little different today, and we're gonna have something more of like an open discussion amongst ourselves, and I'll be asking questions and probably taking your questions and having like a conversation go as the webinar progresses. So I wanna go ahead and start with the first question is really, and I'll open it to both or to Rebeca. What is the issue that we should be talking about in regards to this the created of unaffordable construction, and give us the context of the problem.
Thank you, Glenn. And first of all, thank you for having us here and for the introduction. The problem, as the slide clearly states, the average citizen in Puerto Rico cannot afford the cost associated with renovating or building their homes up to code. And this has resulted in substandard housing for most of the population on the island, as many families have had to undertake do-it-yourself construction, often without the knowledge, skills, or tools to follow safe building practices. The recent natural phenomena that we have faced since 2017, first the hurricanes and this year the earthquakes, have really brought this situation to the forefront. We've all seen the pictures of houses, not yet, We've all seen the pictures of houses that were left without roofs after the hurricanes. And we've also clearly have seen the pictures of the houses that have collapsed after the ground shook in January. We think there's definitely something wrong with this picture, and that we, as part of the design and construction industry, could be playing a much larger role in solving the situation if the government had public policies in place that would allow for it. So next slide. So to dive deeper into this problem, we can talk about our experience as architects in dealing with the situation. As the slide says, having a professional license for us has sometimes felt more like a burden or really a hindrance when we've attempted to do some kind of pro bono work or really work outside the system that that's currently in place in Puerto Rico. And the reason for this is if we analyze the way the design and construction process in Puerto Rico is stated, we will see the cost, that, as we mentioned before, that are associated with this, that are really, most people cannot afford them. Starting by, when we're hired to take a project, we enter the project with a team of professionals, mostly engineers, structural engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, but also with professionals with other specialties, depending on the complexity of the project. Those professionals are needed. We need them to inform us on the design decisions that we make during the design process. Also during the process, there are some building permit requirements that have to be met, and the design team, often led by us, the architects, collaborate in fulfilling those requirements, which I have to underscore are required by law. It's not something we have the option of complying with or not. We have to comply with them. These requirements are cumbersome, mostly because of the way processes have been implemented within agencies, and they are expensive because of the multiple fees that have to be paid at the different stages in the process. Once a building permit is obtained, the construction process begins, and the architect, together with the construction inspector, has to be part of the construction process to ensure that the project is built as per the construction drawings. This is how things are supposed to be done in Puerto Rico. But this costs a lot. Again, the cost, the issue here is the cost. So what ends up happening is that people skip this process and go directly to the construction, often by themselves, or by hiring contractors that do not necessarily are not necessarily up to date on construction codes, or really just disregard them completely because they see them as an inconvenience and as an unnecessary cost. When we attempt to do some kind of pro bono work in this scenario, we are faced with having to assume various risks, including, again, there might be incomplete information for us to work with because the proper assessments in the pre-design phase have not been made, like the land surveys, the geotechnical studies, for example. We go into these projects often with incomplete design teams because we have the disposition to work pro bono, but oftentimes we cannot find other professionals that can go with us into the process. So again, we lack the support of information that we need to make design decisions, and we find ourselves also with the choice of entering projects that will not comply with permit requirements. And this puts us in the very uncomfortable situation of deciding whether we assist people that need our help or do we break the law. So when we assess all of these risks, we usually desist because what's at risk for us. So that's basically the situation for us. Another thing to consider is that especially in this post-hurricane, post-disaster context, is that we have a huge situation before us, and that ad hoc pro bono interventions like the ones we have attempted to do will not solve the problem. They would basically will not solve them. So that's a summary of the situation we're currently at.
Yeah, I hear you speaking, Becky, and I completely agree with what you're saying. That's exactly the scenario. We want to participate, we want to help, but we are not supported legally, and the system is not supporting us in order for us to give 300% for those communities. That's the scenario.
Beautiful. So Cristina, what do you think these reconstruction efforts in Puerto Rico should be proposing?
Well, definitely the efforts should be defined from analysis of the context and from community engagement. We do not agree with centralized reconstruction services and centralized reconstruction schemes. I'm not sure how the system is going to deal with the current seismic earthquake aftermath, but I can recall as an example that in our private firm, we were invited to review the scope of work that was submitted by the Department of Housing for the Repair, Reconstruction, and Relocation Program back in 2018. And it was very easy for us to conclude that after reviewing the scope of work, to able to quote for the services. So we thoroughly looked into it. It was very easy for us to conclude that that contractor scheme, that a big contractor was going to be hired and then several subcontractors at the same time will need to be hired, was only going to dilute the funds that we are receiving, and the benefit to the private homeowner and the community was not going to be achieved cost effectively, because the contractors and their subcontractors need to pay overheads. They need to also pay for a risk mitigation. There are a lot of risks involved in this type of scope of work that it's so big. It has a lot of unforeseen conditions and a lot of undefined conditions. It was difficult for us to quote the services because there were things that we didn't know. We didn't know the amount of houses that needed to be repaired, the location of those houses, and the condition of those houses. So there's a risk that all the subcontractors are translating into money. So that was one of the concerns when we reviewed that scope of work. And the other thing is that it really represented a type of mentality that was centered into new construction, because the houses that with repair cost bigger than $60,000 were going to be redefined into the relocation and reconstruction tier. Therefore, $60,000 may seem like a lot of money, but if you envision a type of construction with a fully bonded contractor in a remote location in Puerto Rico, that may not be enough for the conditions of the houses that you're trying to repair. So we concluded that really there were going to be a lot of houses that were going to be left unrepaired because of this threshold of the $60,000. So we decided not to participate because the impact that we think that this type of reconstruction from a centralized scheme of structure, of contracting structure, we're going to have a lot of detrimental social and environmental impacts. We really think that reconstruction strategies in Puerto Rico should analyze the context and should come from the analysis of the context. The solution must be contextualized. I'm showing you here a population density map of Puerto Rico so you can familiarize yourself with where the people is living mainly. This next slide, you can see the blue shaded areas. That's the flood zone that was revised after Hurricane Maria. You can see that they are big areas. And the most impressive thing is that all of those blue areas, they have a chance of flooding every 10 years. So that's a big rate. So every 10 years, those people are prone to flooding. This is another slide of another hazard that we have to respond to. when we analyze the context that we are going to build into or repair into. And this is the landslide density after Hurricane Maria also. And you can see that it responds directly to Puerto Rico's topography. Puerto Rico has a central mountain range, and you can see that the risk of landslides obviously is higher in the topography, that it's more steep. And if you take those three slides and you put them on top of each other, you can see the blue line representing the flood areas. You can see the central green area representing the landslide hazard condition. And you see where the people is actually living. It's very easy to conclude that most of Puerto Rico is living in a hazardous condition. And if you add to that the complete island of Puerto Rico and all of its islands, because Puerto Rico is more than one island, all of its islands, and in addition, the rest of the Caribbean is in a big seismic prone zone. So we have a high risk of seismic areas. So you can see the complete island of Puerto Rico is under a hazardous situation, and risk needs to be mitigated. And we are saying that because it's so many people and there are so many hazards, the solutions have to become resulting from a contextual analysis that is taken into account mitigation of those hazards like the first step. Also, another important aspect is not only understanding the context, but also understanding the people that live in that context. So participation and decision-making opportunities for the affected communities is fundamental, and that has to be supported and supplemented by educational programs so they know their hazards and start to identify their vulnerabilities. I'm sorry about that word, it's really difficult for me.
It's one
of those words. So they need to identify what hazards are in their community. So educational programs have to supplement that participatory method of engaging the community. And also, very important, inventory and data gathering is also a very important effort, because we still need to learn from the context. We have climate change, we have the emergencies, and that is changing the information and the knowledge that we have. So we have to keep up with those efforts of inventories and data gathering of each context. Another thing that is important is that we are very concerned, as I explained before when I was making reference to the scope of work of the reconstruction after Maria, reconstruction projects after Maria, is that we have to try to repair and reconstruct the built environment to avoid pressure on greenfield areas and try to avoid more urban sprawl. As we were saying, that project seems to be focused on new construction in greenfield areas, and that is a big concern because land use in Puerto Rico is fundamental towards a sustainable future. Puerto Rico is not that big. We have to be very responsible with that land that we have to reserve for natural resources. But there's another truth, and the truth is that climate change and recent earthquakes have shown me, because I was under the impression that relocation of family has to be like left for the last resource, has a solution. And I totally believe in that. And that's why we are emphasizing on mitigation of risk before trying the relocation. But that's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we have to start to observe and learn from it. I'm trying to show you here a community in Guayanilla that from January 2020, from the earthquake in January 7th of this year, the coastal elevation of that area changed, like the floor dropped, and therefore it's constantly flooding. We're not talking about a flood every 10 years. We're saying that a complete community is being constantly flooded by the sea level. And if you add to that what we are expecting of the sea level rise from climate change, it's a big problem. So we have to start creating a collaboratory work group that can establish parameters for relocation that are based on the communities that are affected. The participatory methods, I cannot emphasize this enough. Participatory methods to integrate the community is fundamental for the decision making. They should be the ones deciding how to resolve their situation, not any of us, not the professional sector, not the governmental sector, just the communities and the ones that are affected. And then we also understand that we have a lot of families that do not have a safe home to be in, but we have a huge portfolio of abandoned vacant properties. So that's an opportunity. So we see that as an opportunity. And we know, actually, I think you got a webinar last week talking a little bit about this. So you can go back to that webinar, because there are certain organizations in Puerto Rico that are trying to advocate for the tools, legal tools, to be available for make available the acquisition of abandoned properties to put in use by the community. So there are tools that can help us to acquire those vacant properties. So we see abandoned and vacant properties as an opportunity, because even though we don't like relocation, I prefer the community of Guayanilla to be relocated inside of Guayanilla than to be relocated outside of Puerto Rico. We need to try to strengthen our communities. So what I'm showing you here is it's a pilot project of an abandoned property that was given to a community-based organization that is called Casa Taft, and is going to undertake rehabilitation and improvement. But rehabilitating an abandoned and vacant property is also a big responsibility, because an abandoned vacant property can have their structure compromised because of lack of maintenance, and reinforcing the concrete can compromise the structure. It can have lead and asbestos, which are hazardous materials, and it needs a structural analysis in order to be responsible and say, hey, that vacant property is suitable for seismic and is suitable for hurricanes. So you need a technical assessment in order to make a responsible choice for acquiring and giving that vacant property to a family, which I think it's still an opportunity. It's just that it comes with a challenge. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to rebuild Puerto Rico, the existing built fabric of Puerto Rico, by rethinking safety, health, and sustainability. Those are the factors. And the minimum criteria, I'm not putting even architects here. I'm just putting structural and geotechnical analysis. I'm putting hazardous materials and structural design has the minimum criteria for safety. And I also think that we should use this opportunity to start engaging in sustainability practices. So the minimum criteria, I think that this is very important, should be water management, energy management, and indoor air quality. That are pretty new knowledge and something that culturally maybe we're not familiar with, and we need to take those technical challenges, and it has to be addressed by the professional sector. Water management is also an issue that has to be dealt with responsibility, because it deals with the health of the people. And one thing is that people will always interact with their properties. Even the small project of adding a balcony to your house has to be done responsibly. So I believe that professionals should support the open community in terms of those remodeling projects. And I don't see why do-it-yourself construction has to be incompatible with supporting the community with professional services and doing it responsibly with a permit process. It shouldn't be compatible. It should be compatible. It shouldn't be incompatible. We just need a public policy change in order to make that happen. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back a little bit to what Rebeca was saying, describing what is the construction process in Puerto Rico, but I'm only going to use it for one example. If we read number 1 and number 2, this is a guideline that we took from a reference that is really good. It's called Keep Safe, and it was done by Enterprise Community Research and other partners. Another, thank you, Eki, always saving me. The Enterprise Community Partners. It's a very useful guide. I invite you to look through it. I just want to read through something that brings my concern. The first and two, not a concern, the first and two steps. The person, the citizen, the common citizen needs to determine the problem or the building vulnerability. That word again. And second, they need to create the scope of work. That is not a necessarily easy task. That is a task that can be easily overlooked. If you tell me about these two buildings that you can see how they behave after the seismic events of January, me seeing them without the damage, me as an architect, I would have never imagined that they will behave that way. So sometimes the problems are hidden and they are not face value. That's why I think a professional should support the citizens in order to identify the true vulnerability of those built environments. So we're saying here that we have a very complex situation. We have a complex problem. We have a problem that we have to engage in context analysis, engage in community participation. We have to engage for designing for safety, and we have to engage in designing for health and sustainability. But the solution is not complex. The solution, I think, is very simple. We just have to have the design professionals offered as a public service, just as the same that you have the right to access justice, health, and education. People has the right to access a structural engineer to know if their footings are correctly constructed. I think that should be offered as a public service. And then if we think of probably work groups that can collaborate with the communities and that a group of professionals, a group of community leaders can work together in different regions to really understand the problem of each region, because the problem of one region is very different from the problem of other regions, so we cannot standardize solutions. So I think those small collaborative work groups can be a solution, where you can have multi-sectorial leaders in all the stakeholders can be represented. So the solution is simple, but the problem is really complex. But what we can be benefiting from that type of solution of offering design as a public service is that we can create a new culture of do-it-yourself construction, and we can start developing knowledge among everybody on how things should be constructed if you are in a seismic area, if you are in a flood area, or a landslide type of area.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. You both really have explained the problem and just taken us through how this could be solved. So Rebeca, I want to ask you, how have we explored this solution of having design and construction as a public service? Have we done anything?
Yeah, if you could, yeah, thank you, Cristina. There are some things I've done. I think they have been done a bit ad hoc, not as a comprehensive approach to really promoting a public policy. But some examples that we can show at this moment are the guides that Cristina was talking about, the Keep Safe guide. That was an attempt to really give people some guidelines to plan for their projects. It is a general. It was prepared with a general perspective. It doesn't include detailed construction details or recommendations or methods. It's really very broad, and it is really based on the assumption that professionals will be needed at some point of the process to implement the recommendations included in that guide. So that validates our point that professionals are needed at some point. The other example in this slide on the right is a construction guide that was prepared by the College of Architects and Landscape Architects in Puerto Rico. This guide is a bit more detailed than the Keep Safe guide. It really provides construction details for wooden houses. But again, it falls short because it is really a general solution. It does not tell people how to adapt these recommendations to specific site conditions. It doesn't address if the site is sloped, if the soil, is not suitable to hold the capacity of the house. So there are things that will always really, people will really, there's information gaps in this kind of guides. So they're useful, but that they cannot be the sole solution. The next slide, Cristina.
Right, they're not integrated.
Yeah, they're not integrated, and really, again, they present the general, but not the specific. That's where the professional comes in. Mm-hmm. Another example that we wanted to show is of projects such as the ones undertaken by Proyecto Enlace and the G8 in the Canyon communities. These projects fundamentally, they're conceived to recognize, with the recognition that self-construction will continue. So they're not criminalizing it. Instead, they're trying to visibilize the popular knowledge, recognize people do have some experiences. And what they're trying to do is bridge those experiences, the gap between those experiences and the requirements from the codes, by bringing in professionals to provide workshops, so that people can, again, increase their knowledge. That type of project, we think, could serve as a model for broader public policy in Puerto Rico to replicate, or to see how that could be scaled up to other communities in Puerto Rico. The last examples, there have been some attempts. Well, there has been one attempt that we in our small research we've done, we found in 2018, the College of Architects, together with the College of Engineers, those professional associations, jointly submitted a project to the House of Representatives in Puerto Rico to create a design office that would be publicly funded and would provide design services to people that could not afford them. This project was approved by the House of Representatives, but did not make it to the Senate because, in some people's views, the Puerto Rico Planning Board and the building permit office supposedly are already doing the task of that design office.
But it's not quite true.
Not quite true.
That's not the reality.
Yeah, so those are things we have to, again, we're starting to promote, and speak up about this, and those are things we have to keep, looking into and understand what happened there and why, and what could be done to make those kind of efforts really go through and make it, to policies. So that's one example. The other example we wanted to show is something that happened really within the lawyers in the legal guild. Last year, the regulations for practicing law in Puerto Rico included in the requirements that lawyers have to work 30 hours in pro bono to give assistance to people that could not afford the legal counseling fees. We think, so that's something that could be also adopted by the professional, like the engineers, architects, and other design professionals and construction professionals. And also as a way to, again, to promote this public service, professional practice.
That's great.
I like it, yeah. Such a simple solution too.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed that, people, when you break it down, 30 hours a year is really like 2.5 hours a month, but still people complain.
And I'm sure that professional like yourselves, you offer pro bono hours no matter what, just because of good intentions. So if they could be guided and even counted in some way, that's even better.
Yeah, that's the intent, you know, like to also promote a culture. And that's something that is not in here, but we have thought about this really culture of public service approach or design needs to be embedded even before in academia, when people are you know, in college, you know, because currently under the current system, at least my experience when I was studying architecture is that, you know, we were being trained to be Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry, you know, and the reality is that most of the world really needs public service. We don't need more Zaha Hadid. That's perfect, that's great, but that's not really most of our clients will not be rich people that can afford those kind of projects.
Right, right. So great. Are there any more slides, or can I go ahead and ask the last question?
There's the last question.
Last question.
And folks, remember, we have a chat and a Q&A at the bottom. These sessions are in English because we have audience from the States, but you can go ahead and ask your questions in Spanish. So ladies, what would be, what's the call to action for philanthropy? How can philanthropy go ahead and support either professionals or nonprofits, or, you know, these vulnerable communities in having this type of help?
So we think that the involvement of design and construction industry professionals beyond their traditional role as a commodity that only a privileged few can afford is a key element in addressing the island's substandard housing situation. But we think this issue has really gone under the radar when philanthropy has been addressing, and I can speak to that, you know, personally, because I've been involved in these conversations, and these issues have really been, again, under the radar, you know, and it needs to be uplifted and spoke about when we're talking about other issues, such as building the capacity of organizations, nonprofits to access the recovery funds, or when we're talking about ensuring that the funds that the community participates in the decision making. You know, when we're having those conversations, this issue of public service design professionals has to be included in that conversation.
Absolutely, and again, this is where we're bringing these webinars and having this initial talk and presenting these perspectives that we might just be unaware in all of our intentions in reconstruction or in supporting organizations and rebuilding and everything. So thank you both for that. I hope that we can start planting a seed of that awareness and get this conversation rolling. Let me open it up for questions. Let's see, do we have any questions? I haven't seen any questions. I think people are like still digesting everything. And let me see over here. I think that's good. Any final thoughts or anything that you feel that you'd like to share before we end this webinar?
Well, I just want to reiterate that.
Are you guys there? Did it freeze?
What? Can you hear me? I'm here.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can hear
you. I just want to reiterate that it may not be one project that is going to promote design services as a public service. It can be different projects that work together and supplement each other. We think that all the examples that Becky just showed are a piece of the pie that we have to start constructing. We have to implement pro bono work, and we have to also have policy change, and we have to also change in academia our point of view. So it's not one solution, but a series of projects that could help promoting in making design services affordable and available to all. That's the basic message that we have here to share. We need to make design services affordable, and I think we can be part of the liaisons with the community involvement, and we can be part of that work group that engages the community in order to understand their problems and propose solutions based on those problems and not in what we think it should happen. And the multi-sectorial type of work effort is really important. We need to stress that very, with a lot of emphasis.
Okay, beautiful. So that was the Q to your A. A to your Q, I'm sorry.
A to your Q.
Great, let me see if we have another question. I don't think we do in either of the platforms.
I have a question.
Oh, we do have one more.
Yes, I have a question. Are these webinars able to be accessed after the live update? How can people access if they were not able to join in?
Yes, we have them in Filantropía Puerto Rico.online, and thank you for bringing that up, Cristina. But all these webinars are recorded and shared after the fact. So they are available for everybody, and we will be sharing the PDFs and the recording of this, and both your contact, Cristina and Rebeca, your contacts and bios are available, since we didn't give the whole brief of that, but that is available and will be shared. And at the end of this webinar, you will also get a feedback form. It's pretty short, but we'd love to hear how we can make these better, and also any themes or conversations that you would like to have discussed. Go ahead and write those down, because we will bring these topics. We're going to be very intentional in the next couple of weeks of what webinars we present given the crisis. So any feedback is awesome. I want to give one big thanks and applause also to Enterprise, because much of the material that you used in this presentation on the Keep Safe guide was from Enterprise, and we do have Erika from Enterprise here, and she said that this guide is digitalized in English and in Spanish, so that it is easier to navigate to get the pertinent sections rather than navigating through a bulky PDF. So Erika, if you can send me those links, we'll go ahead and add them, or probably Cristina and Rebeca have them, but we'll go ahead and share those in the recording of the presentation. And also in our YouTube channel, you can get the recording of this webinar. So thank you so much, Cristina and Rebeca, for sharing your perspective and giving this call to action. Thank you for all the attendees and the people that are watching this recording. Stay safe. Have a great rest of the weekend. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.